So if the Lord will help us today, I'd like to preach on making the most of my life. I want to make the most of my life for Jesus Christ. And we're going to be in Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter. And as we get there, as you guys turn there, I'd like to tell you a story about a young man that I heard about a few years ago. His name was John. He was a college student, and he had just gotten saved. And just down the street from his college campus, there was a big church. And he decided one Sunday morning that he was going to go to that church. And he got there, and he got up Sunday morning, and he walked down there with his flip-flops on and his T-shirt and his jeans with a hole in it, and he walked into this big church, and everybody was dressed just right, and everybody looked a certain way, and there he came walking, and he took off his flip-flops because at the place where he worshiped the Lord, they didn't wear shoes. They just walked on in, and he walked down this long aisle, and he walked down, and he started noticing people were kind of looking at him, and there wasn't a seat here, there wasn't a seat there, and as he got closer to the front, he could see there wasn't a place to sit in any pews, so he just sat down on the carpet in the aisle. And the whole church was quiet. And an elderly gentleman from the back, who was one of the ushers, he was about 80 years old, he got up, and he started walking down the aisle. And he had his gray hair, he had a really nice suit on, and he had a cane. And everybody was quiet, and they were wondering if, what he was going to do, because he was the greeter, but he was also the usher. So he started coming down the aisle, and the only thing you could hear in that church was his cane tap. Tap. As it came down every other step, you could hear that cane tap. And as he got closer to that young man, John looked up at him, and he looked down at John, and he dropped his cane, and he sat down there cross-legged beside John, because he didn't want John to be alone worshiping the Lord. And he sat there in the aisle in his three-piece suit and his gray hair. Now, he struggled to get down there with him. And people started to cry and to weep. And the preacher got behind the pulpit. He goes, I was about to preach, but I understand today that what I would have preached, you may never remember. But what you just saw, you'll never forget. See, there are people that are coming to Jesus that may not look like you, that may not act like you, that may not fit the image that you've got in your mind of all these things. But we need to understand in these last days, that's the way it's going to be. There's going to be people coming to Jesus that may not look like us, that may not act like us. So, I need to think, how can I make the most of my life in these last days? How can I make the most of my life? I'm not talking about when life is going great. I'm not talking about when everything's lining up, when all the bills are being met and everything's just hunky-dory. I'm talking about when life hands you a bunch of lemons, when things aren't going real well, when you've got family problems, when you maybe had a death in the family, when you've got some financial situation, all those other things when things are going bad. What are you going to do with your life when that happens? How are you going to make the most out of your life when those things happen? So God tells us through Solomon in Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, Solomon gives us 5 keys to making the most out of our life. Ecclesiastes, 3rd chapter, and I've read this at a lot of funerals, and it says, to everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down, a time to build up. A time to weep, a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to get, a time to lose. A time to keep, a time to cast away. A time to rend, a time to sow. A time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. See, Solomon wrote those 8 verses there. He says, for everything under heaven, there's an activity. There's an activity for everything that's going on. So the first thing we need to understand, accept God's guidance in every aspect of your life. In the good times, in the bad times, as we go through all these things, it's a time to do all this stuff. See, let's notice a few of the things that Solomon mentioned in the second verse. It said, a time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to pluck up that which is planted. Think about that. God says there's a time to be born. There's a time to die. God appointed, he knew when we were going to be born. But what happens when we mess with God's plans? What happens when we abort those babies, millions upon millions of babies every year? Did we perhaps abort the one that was going to cure cancer or cure Alzheimer's? Did we abort Edison or Einstein or somebody else? Did we do all these things? Have we done all those things? In the third verse, it says, there's a time to kill and a time to heal. There's a time to break down and a time to build up. See, there's a time to break down bad relationships. There's a time to get rid of all those bad relationships and do all those things. And there's also times to build up those things. There's times to heal those things as well. We need to decide in our life what's best for us according to the Word of God and according to the will of God and do exactly what He's called us to do. We need to get rid of all those bad feelings. We need to accept God's guidance in every aspect of our life. In the 6th verse, it says, a time to get and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away. See, I read that every now and then and I get anxious because I'm a keeper. You know, if you look at my garage, my wife will tell you, I'm a keeper. I don't like to throw away things. But Solomon's saying, hey, there's a time to pitch stuff. There's a time to get rid of some of that stuff. There's a time to do that. I need, and the problem is I didn't marry a pitcher. I married another keeper. We keep, because I'm scared to death. If I throw something away, now I'm going to need it next week. So we need to realize that there's going to be times in our life when we need to throw certain things out and we need to keep certain things. As we read all these things, in the 7th verse, it says, there's a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Usually we got that mixed up. We're silent when we should speak, and we speak all the time when we should be silent. The Lord tells us there's going to be a time for that. And like we said this morning in the 8th verse, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. We talked about it this morning. God hates sin, and He wants us to hate sin. He doesn't want us to hate the sinner. He doesn't want us to hate all those things, but He wants us to hate sin because of what it does to us, because it separates us from the relationship that we have with Him, because it's separating us from the things that He wants to do for us. That's why He wants us to hate sin. That's why He hates sin so much. See, altogether in this just first 8 verses, He's mentioned 28 events that happen in our life. He's mentioned 28 things. And He wants us to understand that in the good times, God's there. In the bad times, God's there. In everything in our life, there's going to be victories. There's going to be defeats. There's going to be things that we can't help ourselves, that we're going to have to go through. But God wants to be part of every aspect of your life. So we need to accept that and let Him lead us and guide us through those tough times in life. The second thing, affirm your faith in confusing times in the 11th verse. The 11th verse, it says, He hath made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has set the world in their heart so that no man can find out the work that God maketh from beginning to the end. He said, He's made everything beautiful in its time. Why is that? Because He set the future in our heart. Think about it. Human beings are the only one that care about the future. You don't see a dog with a 401k. You don't see a cat with a savings account. You don't see all those things going on, but we plan for the future. We plan for our retirement. We should also be planning for an eternity with Jesus Christ. We should be planning for that thing. That's why He says in that second part of that 11th verse, and no man can find out the work that God maketh from the beginning to the end. No man can find those things out. See, we could try to figure out what God's doing and all that stuff, but it's not going to happen. In John, the 13th chapter, the 7th verse, it says, Jesus answered and said unto him, what I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. He's saying, what I'm doing right now, you guys aren't going to understand. But one of these days, you're going to understand. See, we want to know what God's plan is right now. We want to know what his plan is. Oh, God, if I just understood, I could go along with you. If I just knew, if I could just wrap my head around it. See, people ask, like, why is this happening to me? God, why is this happening to me? And I usually tell them, I'll put it on the list. They're like, but if we get there, we're not going to care about that list. We're not going to care about all that stuff. See, we get all wrapped up in this stuff and we think we've got to know right now. In 2 Corinthians, the 1st chapter, the 9th verse, it says, but we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God which raises the dead. What does that mean? Paul's saying, hey, there was nothing that we could do. We were helpless. We had a sentence of death on us. But what if we trust the guy? What if we trust the God? What if we trust the being that raised Jesus Christ from the dead? Maybe he's got the answer. Maybe he's got the power. So if I'm too helpless to worry about any of this other stuff down here, let me just learn to trust in God. That's what Paul's saying there in that 2 Corinthians, the 1st chapter, 9th verse. But if we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God which raises the dead. See, if I can't do anything, why trust in myself? Why not trust in God? And that's what God's asking us to do. Trust in him. Because if he could raise the dead to life again, he could take care of anything in this life that we need him to take care of. The third thing, apply ourselves to doing good. In the Ecclesiastes 3rd chapter, that 12th verse. And I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. He said, only thing you need to do is do good in life. Now think about that. Apply yourself to doing good. As I've gotten older, I find out doing good makes me happy, Johnny. When I'm doing good, it makes me happy. And sometimes I'm happy because I'm doing good. It's a great big wheel in a wheel. But if you're out there trying to sneak around a corner, do this or that other, and you're worried about somebody finding you out, you're not happy. You're not happy. You're not encouraged. So what Solomon's saying in Ecclesiastes, hey, the best thing for you to do is do good for people, and you're going to end up being happy. See, so this week, why don't we pick somebody out that we drop a line to, send a letter to, send a card to, pick up a phone, say, hey, I love you, I'm thinking about you. If we could just practice doing good, we could find ourselves being a little bit happy. Because when we start worrying about other people, we stop worrying about ourselves. We start worrying about the welfare of other people. We start worrying about how bad a situation we might be in. So we need to apply ourselves to doing good. That's what Solomon says in that 12th verse. I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice and to do good in his life. See, there's an old saying, don't send me flowers after I'm dead. That's not going to do me any good. Don't send me flowers after I'm dead. That doesn't do me good. I can't enjoy them. So let's tell people how much we love them right now. Let's tell people how much we care about them right now, how much we're thinking about them right now. 13th verse of that 3rd chapter. We need to learn to appreciate our life as a gift from God. That 13th verse says, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is a gift of God. See, we should enjoy our life. It's a gift of God. He's given us that. We didn't do anything to deserve it. We didn't do anything to earn it. We didn't do anything to receive any of that. It's a gift from God. We're alive right now. It's a gift of God, and we need to rejoice and thank God for it. We need to enjoy this life that He's given us by doing good to other people, by blessing other people, by lifting other people up, by telling other people about the same Jesus that we serve, about this God that's given us all this life. Enjoy the moments in your life. It's okay to enjoy birthdays. It's okay to enjoy weddings. It's okay to enjoy the work of our hands. It says, enjoy the good of all His labor. That is the gift of God. It's okay to have a little bit of fun on this journey. It's okay to enjoy a little bit of this journey. You know, we walk around like we've been a mule eating cider. I can't believe this. I got up this morning. Oh, it was cold outside. I didn't want to get up, but had the dog scratching on the door going, I want to go out. and got up and let the dog out, and I was cold then. But I wanted to go back to bed, but I sat there and started thinking, this is a day that the Lord hath made. Amen. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And I started looking forward to being here today. And I started looking forward to sharing the word and sharing fellowship and all those things. We get all caught up. We need to thank the Lord and enjoy and appreciate our life of the gift that it is. It's an opportunity to reach out to a lost and dying world and tell them about Jesus Christ. See, He's given us this purpose. He's given us this ability. The 15th verse of the 3rd chapter of Ecclesiastes. This is where the rubber starts meeting the road. That which hath been is now, and that which is to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past. The 17th verse, it says, I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. We need to anticipate having to give an account of our life to God. Think about that. How would you live if you realize you've got to give an account for your life to God? How would that change things? Would that change some of the decisions? Would that change some of the actions? In Romans, the 14th chapter, the 10th verse, it says, but why dost thou judge thy brother? Or why dost thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. In Romans 14th chapter, the 12th verse, it says, so then every one of us shall give an account of himself to God. Each and every one of us is going to give an account. So why are we worrying about what's going on with our brother? Why are we worrying about what they're doing or what they're not doing? I need to be worrying about what Houston's doing. I need to be worrying about what I need to be doing and what the things that's going on there. See, we've all had an opportunity. We've all had an opportunity because Jesus Christ died for our sins. Jesus Christ hung on an old rugged cross and shed His blood for you and I, so that we can all be saved. See, if you're a Christian, you don't have to worry about standing in front of God and giving an account of your sins. You've been forgiven. But you may have to stand in front of God and give an account for the life that He gave you. How can you make the most of your life? In Ephesians, the 5th chapter, the 15th verse, it says, see then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. See, we've got to redeem the time. As my wife comes to the piano, see, one of these days, we're going to face judgment. One of these days, we may be looking God in the eye, and He may be saying, what did you do with the life that I gave you? What did you do with the gift that I gave you? Did you do the things I asked you to do? Did you reach out to a lost and dying world? As they come, there's a story, 1921, Lewis Laws, he was the warden of Sing Sing prison in 1921. Sing Sing prison is about 30 miles north of New York City. And it was a horrible place to be in prison. But after 20-some years of Lewis Law being there, it became an ideal penal institution. And they used to brag on Lewis Laws and said, you've created, the perfect prison here. And he goes, no, I didn't. He goes, all the credit goes to my wife, whose grave is just outside the prison walls right now. See, Catherine Laws was a young mother with 3 kids when her husband became warden of Sing Sing. And people told her, don't ever set foot in that prison. It's a horrible place to be. But she goes, my husband's taking care of these men here, and these men will take care of me. And she would go to the prison basketball games with her 3 little kids, and she would sit there and watch. And she'd go and watch her baseball games, and she said, I need to find out these men's stories and their records. And she found out that one of the convicted murderers there was blind. So she learned Braille and taught him how to read in Braille. She found out that another one was a deaf mute, and she took classes on how to sign and how to communicate with him. She became Jesus incarnate to those prisoners in Sing Sing prison in the 1920s. Anything that they needed, she ministered to their needs. And in 1937, she was killed in a car wreck. And Lewis Laws left the prison abruptly to go be at the side of his 3 children because they had just lost their mother. And as that news began to spread in that prison that she had just passed away, the next day the assistant warden came by and making his rounds, and he noticed as he went by the front gate there was a herd of prisoners there. And he thought, oh my goodness, they're about to break out. And he got there and he looked, and they were all standing there holding the bars, and they were all crying. And he goes, you guys can go, because she was laying in a casket 3/4 of a mile away. She goes, you all can go and say your final respects, but check in when you come back. And in 1937, 300 inmates from Sing Sing prison walked 3/4 of a mile to pay their last respects to a woman that loved them, the woman that showed them what the love of Jesus Christ was all about. And each and every one of them walked back into that prison a couple hours later, signed back in, and served their terms. How many people did she lead to the Lord simply because she believed in everything that Jesus said? She believed that she could make a difference. What are we doing with the life that we've got? Are we making the most of our life? Are we reaching out to a lost and dying world and being what they need? Are we being the arms and the feet of Jesus Christ? Are we being the arms and the feet? Are we showing love and compassion to tell a lost and dying world that there's a heaven to get to and there's a hell to miss? Like I said at the beginning, we don't know when they're going to shut this camera off. And we're not going to be able to reach out through WCNW, through Facebook. But while we have this opportunity, let me tell you that Jesus Christ is the only answer. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And no man can come to the Father except by Him. Let's all stand as they sing the song. If you don't know Jesus, I invite you to come to the saving knowledge of Jesus today. If you do know Jesus, are you making the most of the life that He's given you? Let's all pray.
For I see